Hello and welcome to Love is a Business Strategy, a podcast that brings humanity to the workplace. We're here to talk about business, but we want to tackle those topics that most business leaders might shy away from. And we believe that humanity and love should be at the center of every successful business. We're here to have conversations and hear stories about real people and real businesses. And I, as always, am your host, Jeff Maw, and I'm joined today by Trevor Theunissen. Trevor currently serves as the Vice President of Government Affairs at Shipt. And before that, he also spent 7 years at Uber, where he led Uber's government affairs and communications teams for the South and Southwest regions. Super excited to have this moment to talk to you, Trevor. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Appreciate you having me and really excited to join.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's just, Shipt, Uber, two big names that basically are household names at this point for many. Really, really excited to dive into that. And before we do, there's an awkward thing I make every guest do, which is answer a random question as an icebreaker. So you'll humor me for that. for today's question is, if you had a full-time personal assistant, what would be the first thing you'd have them take off your plate? As a
That is
personal, like a life personal assistant, not just for work. Like,
a great question. I think it would probably be getting my kids dressed for school in the morning. I have a 5, 3, and 9-month-old, and
oh
so
my,
it is a constant battle in the morning. My 3-year-old daughter's into picking out what she wears and making sure that everything is perfectly unwrinkled. And it is just a Royal Rumble WWE style every morning. So that would relieve a lot of stress, and I think make the house a happier place from the hours of 7 to 8 a.m.
amazing answer. That actually changes. I mean, I'd go with that. I mean, I just didn't realize I had that need until you just said it as
Yeah,
well.
there you go.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's dive into I want to start somewhere very, very simple, which is Trevor, tell me about what you're passionate about. I guess share your passion with me if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure thing. I am a transit and transportation nerd, self-proclaimed, self-described, self-labeled. And honestly, transportation and travel is a true passion of mine. My entire life, I have been a travel seeker and have been fascinated since I was very young with trains, planes, and automobiles, as most children are. And I've just as I've gotten older, really come to better appreciate the role that travel and transportation and the way that we move impacts not only the way that we live, but the way that we learn, and the way that we interact. And so I am a huge transit and transportation geek, and it is a real true passion of mine.
That's not a phrase I've heard uttered before. So help me break it down a little bit. What does it mean to you to be a transit and transportation nerd?
Yeah, so I really geek out on the ways and the systems that are built in order to move people, and also especially relating to equity and inclusion in transportation and transportation access. I think one of the big challenges that this country has is that we just don't have a robust public transit system and transportation system across the country. Certainly, there are cities who have and states who have good ones and others who have not so great ones. But I think just as a whole, the country is really far behind other countries and other societies as it relates to free, equitable, and robust transit and transportation systems, both private and public sector, and how those two things relate, I think, is super important. And so, as I think through the work that I've done, both in my personal capacity and in my professional capacity, that link between jobs and access to healthcare and access to food and access to housing is a real transportation challenge. And I think if you could figure out the transportation needs and align our resources with those needs, then that'll actually help in many different aspects of society and industry.
I think that's so cool. I love I love a specific passion. I ask the question a lot, and there's nothing wrong with everyone's passion is their passion, which is great. But I really love when people are able to find in life. I think it's one of the hardest things in life to do is to uncover that. So that's incredible. And it's very, very fitting. I think it's very cool. You went from planes, trains, and automobiles, and you landed at Uber. Can you tell me a little bit about like what brought you there and what happened there?
Yeah, sure thing. So, yeah, I mean, as a kid, obviously Uber did not exist, and so I wasn't playing with toy Ubers. I was playing with toy taxis, and yeah, I was in government and politics most of my career. After I went to law school, I was really involved in rebuilding efforts after Hurricanes Katrina and Rita in New Orleans and Louisiana. I'm born and raised in Louisiana, and after law school and during law school was really impacted. By the hurricanes. It was sort of a big deal in our lives,
Sure.
and wanted to help out. So I worked in state government and city government for quite some time, and really, used transportation and my passion for transportation to figure out how can we rethink the way that we move people in Louisiana and in the city of New Orleans after Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, when so much federal resources were being spent on rethinking the way that we build our infrastructure. So did that for a while, and while I was working for the New Orleans City Council, the NFL had said, "Hey, we want to bring the Super Bowl to New Orleans, but here are a few things that we need from you before we do that." And one of the things that they said they needed was to reform the city's taxi cab industry. So at the time, like in many cities, taxi cabs in New Orleans didn't have age limits. They didn't have to be required to have credit cards. There was no sort of real regulation as it related to customer satisfaction. And so I worked on that piece of legislation with Mayor Mitchell Andrew and my boss, former council member Kristen Palmer, to really think through how do we revitalize our taxi system, both to make it beneficial to taxi drivers and taxi owners, but also for customers. And so I did a lot of work around that and transportation, and then I led a nonprofit called Ride New Orleans, which is still in existence and doing really incredible work in the city of New Orleans. It's a transit advocacy nonprofit, so advocating, one, being sort of a watchdog and a think tank to the public transit agency, the Regional Transit Authority in New Orleans, as well as really doing some community and grassroots organizing with transit riders to really understand sort of what are their challenges on a day-to-day basis. Is it a crappy bus stop that they have to sit in or sit next to? Is it that their line isn't as efficient as they need it to be in order to get to their job? And really learning and advocating better for transit riders. So between those two things, I had a real sort of professional background in transit and transportation. And so when Uber was looking for a manager to do government affairs and public policy in the Southeast, I threw my name in the hat and thankfully got the job. And so at that point, it was in 2015 when Uber was just started expanding into different cities with their peer sharing model, which is UberX, as opposed to just their black car service,
Mhm.
which they started out doing. And that was really transformational for me personally. And I think for a lot of cities, it was trying to convince elected officials and regulators and politicians that this actually was something new and something different and shouldn't be regulated in an old, ancient, archaic way like taxi cabs were. And
Mm.
actually, part of it was to help taxi cab industry also understand that this can be beneficial for you if you catch up, or it could be detrimental if you don't get with the times. And so yeah, that was sort of the start. And then spent 7 years and worked from everything from transportation to flying cars to Uber Eats to self-driving cars and all of the other stuff that Uber was into and still is.
That's awesome. And then more recently, it brought you to Shipt. And can you talk a little bit about your role there now?
Yeah, sure thing. So I've been with Shipt for about 6 months now. Shipt is a same day delivery platform that delivers both grocery and retail items to your front door. So we are a wholly owned subsidiary of Target, and do a lot of Target's last mile deliveries from their stores. But we also partner with over 130 other retailers. We just announced this week a partnership with Walgreens and 7-Eleven, where you can shop their stores on our app, and we deliver them to you to your front door. So
Cool.
it's available all over the country. We're growing tremendously. And I serve as the vice president of government affairs there, where I sort of work on similar issues to what I was working on at Uber. And as the same day delivery sector grows, and delivery of and transportation of items and retail items grows, Shipt is a major player in that space as well.
That's awesome. I am super excited to ask this question because I'll ask this of anybody I talk to, not on the show or not, but especially from your perspective. So, in industries such as transportation, transit, across your experience like Uber and Shipt, and also in the sense that you're working in like legal and government affairs, all these different domains. I love that intersectionality and that crossover of things that you deal with. What is your perspective of the importance of within your organizations and those around you? What is the importance of putting people first? Where do you see that happening, or where do you not see that happening in those environments?
Yeah, look, I think it's a huge topic right now for the gig economy and the big players in the gig economy, like Shipt, like Uber, like your other gig third party delivery platforms, and transportation network companies like Uber and Lyft. I think um, it a lot of it stems around customer satisfaction and making sure that the customer is treated well. I think one of the things we do really well at Shipt, and which is really interesting, is we're a people first company, and we make sure that our people, not only our customers, but our shoppers and our drivers and our workers, are put first in all the decisions that we make. It's also interesting to see sort of what Target brings to the table as a parent company of Shipt.
Mhm.
They are a traditional big box retailer, and so they have been for years obsessed with what the customer experience is as they walk in the door, but also how they treat their Target members, right? Those people who are working in their stores every single day. And Target has always been known as a real great place to work because they're making decisions as it relates to putting their people first. I think it also is a really fascinating time as it relates to the gig workers and the gig economy and the future of work. And now that you have vast majority of people who are in the gig space and doing gig jobs or freelance jobs, um, why it matters that, one, they're moving into that work. And I think that the real reason is because they want to be their own boss and they want the flexibility that comes with it.
Mhm.
And two is, how do we treat those workers better when it comes to making decisions on their behalf, as a place where they work, and also what are the benefits and perks and things that they receive in return for that work. And so, it is a really interesting time in the gig space and with the gig economy, with the way that the economy has been, and sort of the labor shortage out there. It's been really fascinating to see how companies in our space are putting people first, not only their customers, but the workers that work for them.
Yeah, it's such a it's a space that I don't think about often because I in my conversations in my line of work, we're always talking about directly, just organizational, leaders, and then the people who work for them in the same department, same kind of thing. And when it comes to gig work, I mean, I have to say, I'm not even clear. Like, are gig workers treated as employees directly, or how does that all work? Actually, do they have a, do you, is there a culture? Does the culture extend to gig workers? Do they have their own? Help me
Yeah,
understand that a little bit.
it's a great question. So legally, in all 50 states, gig workers are independent contractors, so they are not employees of the companies that they work with. There are debates that happen, as you can imagine, all over the country right now. There's a ballot initiative going on in Massachusetts. There was just a big ballot initiative in California around, making sure in law and codified in law that gig workers are independent contractors and not employees. I think if you ask gig workers, which we have and the industry has, the majority of them will say that they want to remain independent contractors because of that flexibility. The minute they're made employees, the company gets to dictate when and how they work, which is a
Sure.
totally different reason than why they join and take up gig work in the first place. I will say though that the industry has recognized that we can do a lot better on how we treat gig workers and what they receive from the companies. I think one of the big fascinating aspects of law and policy right now is around how algorithms make decisions based on work, right? So
Mm,
when a a shopper on Shipt or a driver with Uber gets a request to, they can pick if they want to take that shop or they want to take that trip or not. But the way that they get paid is based on an algorithm, right? And there's a bunch of inputs that go into that algorithm. And I think there's a general lack of understanding from gig workers, and rightly so, because those algorithms can be pretty opaque, right? I mean, it's a lot of internal data and inputs that go into that algorithm, and all those gig workers see as an output, which is here's how much I'm going to make for that trip, and they don't really understand what all goes behind it because there's not a lot of clarity on that. And so I think that is one place where we're seeing a lot more interest, and a lot of gig workers saying, hey, I want more insight into this, and like, how am I getting paid and how am I getting rewarded? I think the second thing that we're hearing a lot of is we want benefits as well, right? We want traditional benefits that employees get.
mm,
And I think that's where Shipt is really sort of leading, helping to lead the conversation and leading the conversation, which is we know that gig workers want certain benefits. We know that some want healthcare, some want paid sick time, some want paid family medical leave. They aren't traditionally entitled to those benefits because they're not employees, they are independent contractors. And under the current law, if a company like Shipt wanted to proactively offer those, we wouldn't be able to, given the current legal structures. And so, in order for us to be able to do that, we have to go and change state law and ultimately federal law if we want a 50 state solution. And so those are the conversations that are happening right now. I think it is a really good time for the companies to start putting their heads around, like, what does this look like? There's been a lot of academics and experts who have said what we need is a sort of portable benefit system, which allows gig workers to get benefits from the platforms that they work for, and certain of those benefits be aggregated for those workers to access. So let's say you work for Shipt for 3 hours a week, you work for Uber for 4 hours a week, you work for Instacart another 3 hours a week. We would all pay into a portable
mm,
benefits account based on
yeah.
the hours that you worked on our platform. And then that gig worker could access that portable benefits account just like an FSA or HSA card, and go and purchase benefits for their family. And it would be pretty open, right? They could purchase whatever they needed. A lot of politicians have said, hey, gig workers need healthcare. And in fact, when we do surveys as an industry on, hey, what would you like? When we ask gig workers what they would like, healthcare is actually eighth or ninth on their list because they're getting it from some other means. They're either getting it from a partner or they're getting it from a full-time job that they already have. And so
Right.
making sure that those benefits are flexible, I think is an important thing as well.
Wow. Like, just incredible. I haven't really stopped to think about so many of these elements. Um, I'm still curious. Would you say that these collective gig workers, either by company or just as a whole, share a culture? Like, what is your take on that?
Yeah, I think they certainly do. I think the culture changes from platform to platform and where they work, right? So the culture of a traditional Uber driver, I think, is very different than the culture of a Shipt shopper, right? So the average Uber driver drives, 22, 23 hours a week on Uber. The average Shipt shopper does about 8 hours on the Shipt platform, and that varies across all platforms. DoorDash, Lyft, they all have their own different sort of makeup of what the traditional gig worker is on their platform. So just inherently on the type of work, whether it's grocery shopping or retail shopping or driving passengers around, That creates a certain culture, as well as the amount of hours that they work on that platform. And so I think traditionally what we've seen at Shipt is, we have our shoppers tend to skew a little older, and with more flexibility. So they're really only doing this a couple times a week as opposed to every day.
Mhm.
Um, and so that really dictates the culture, per platform. But I would say that they're super well connected, right? They love to learn from each other. They love to learn from the company. They love to be part of sort of what we're doing as a company. They're very prideful of their work. They really have a connection to that customer that they're shopping for, that they're doing work for. And so it's a really prideful, community that's really proud of the work that they do.
Yeah, and you know, when I think about addressing people and addressing cultures in this context, usually the standard kind of setup is you have a whole group of people, large or small, who are sitting in a certain position doing the work. And then when you want to address culture for them, I'm always starting with their leader, like their supervisor or whatever, or and moving up the chain, right? So talking about those behaviors, the way that they're treated directly, and the way that they're considered through actual physical human behavior and interaction, right? And then I think of the gig workers who, like you said, share this common knowledge, this culture, this experience. But am I correct in kind of saying that their boss, though, collectively, like their leader, is kind of like this nameless, faceless kind of entity that binds them all? Is that like their supervisor, or is there some other way that they're reached at a human level?
Yeah, I think I would say, different companies are better at sort of that human level connection than others in the gig space. And I think all the companies are experimenting with what is the best way to reach the workers on our platform. I mean, at the end of the day, the workers and the shoppers and the drivers are core at the heart of what the company and the success of these companies. And so
Yeah.
making sure that they are treated, in a way that is respectful and honored and heard is super important. We have a whole process around, shopper engagement, at Shipt, around how do we cultivate positive culture among our shoppers. How do we make sure we're meeting their needs? How do we make sure that from a product and a tech perspective, they are getting their needs met, when they're doing their shop? Is it easy to use the app? Is it intuitive? How are we making sure that we're meeting, the day-to-day skills that they need, and making sure that we're syncing those? And so I think you're right. I think there is a little bit of the, you know if I'm working or driving on 4 or 5 different platforms a week, who is my boss, right? Who is that leader? Um, but I think frankly that's part of the appeal of the work, right? They don't want a boss. They don't want a
Hmm.
leader. They want to be able to do it on their own terms at their own time, not have to report in, not have to fill out a report, not have to do the traditional things that the employee relationship brings. But I
Hmm.
think we have to create a new dynamic of how do you stay connected and how do you create a culture within gig work for those people who don't want a boss or a supervisor.
Yeah, that's wow. And you mentioned earlier that you know it's all about, I guess, I think you phrased it better, but it was about putting people, considering people in this at the center of your decision making, things like that. Can you give an example, I guess, of across any of this space where those decisions are made, like putting these drivers and these shoppers first? Like, what type of decisions are we talking about?
Yeah, it's a great question. So at Shipped, we seek driver input a lot on decisions that we make. We just did so around, a new announcement regarding our pay structure for shoppers. We're now guaranteeing a flat minimum pay, on all, shops that happen on the platform that shoppers do. So we will guarantee you that at minimum you will make $16 an hour, anywhere in the country on a ship shop. That's sort of industry set stand. I mean, industry groundbreaking, right? Like that hasn't been done by any company in the gig space yet. And a
Sure.
lot of the work that we did was a lot of work that we did around that issue was listening to shoppers to say what matters most to you. Pay is typically number one, and flexibility. And how do we make sure that we're paying the right amount, not only from a just a living standard perspective and rewarding people for the work that they're doing, but also from a competitive perspective. The better you pay, the better it is to work, the more the more work gets done. And so there's formalized structures within Shipt on how we seek shopper input as well as shopper engagement, right? One of the things we're working on now is, what perks do shoppers like, right? What would really help them in their day-to-day lives? Is that a traditional perk program where if you sign up to be a Shipt shopper, you get discounts at these companies that matter to you, that you use on a daily or weekly basis with your family? What matters most to you? So I think, making sure that there are sort of those touch points, and that it's a constant conversation and not just a one-off ask when you're building a new product or you're rolling out with a new feature. It's not just a checked box like, hey, have we done a focus group around this? Check, and then move on. That it's actually a sustained, constant conversation that you're having with your workers.
Yeah, that's so important. I think that to me was the challenge that immediately stood out to me was hearing, when you have this very unconventional kind of like layer of work that isn't bound by, let's say, a supervisor or a leader, and they're all these independent contractors, making policies and changes to procedure and tools and technology can be very easily tone deaf, or imagine almost anything you change will always have people who are unhappy about it, or there's multiple sides to everything, and so keeping your I guess ears and hearts open to what's actually being received by that group is probably a huge challenge.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. And it's also follow-up, right? I mean, I think that is a huge piece of this, which is, after a decision is made, like we just rolled out with our minimum pay, um, follow-up it needs to be consistent and it needs to be meaningful. And so, if we went wrong somewhere, or if we're getting feedback that, it's not the right calculation in XYZ market, we have to be responsive to that, and we've got to have inputs or mechanisms in place that allow for those inputs to come into us, and make sure that, once we roll out a product feature or a new tech feature or a new whatever it is, that we don't just shut off the conversation and say, oh, we've rolled it out, now everybody's fine, right? It's that constant feedback loop so that we can have input on, how this gets actually felt by the people who are doing it, and not
Mm.
just a decision at HQ.
Yeah. With the last segment of time I have, I'm curious, where else do you see, I guess, love being played out, in your opinion, in your perspective, in the business environment? You're in Shipt or Uber or wherever you've seen it. Where does love play a role to you?
Yeah, I think love really stands out to me in those personal connections that are made in the back of an Uber with the driver and the rider, or in a Shipt shop where the Shipt shopper goes and shops your order and messages me and says, "Hey, they're out of bananas, but I know that your children love tomatoes. Do you want to sub the tomatoes for bananas?" And then they come to my house and they drop off the order, and I ask them how their kids are doing, and we have a conversation, and then I can favorite that shopper. So that anytime you need notification that, hey, Trevor, the person you shop for, is interested in you shopping for them again. Sort of those sort of connections, I think, are so meaningful and so impactful. And I think, that is really where the platform is really just the intermediary, right? They're just creating that connection as a company, that we're facilitating that connection for a business purpose, but the real magic is in that personal connection that happens between those two individuals. And I've experienced this many times in the back of an Uber where, I'm getting a ride to somewhere, and I strike up a conversation with the driver, and it's just a fascinating, amazing conversation between two strangers. And I feel like, in our society in this day and age, especially with COVID, those stranger conversations are few and far between. We either have our phone in our hand, our AirPods in our ear, walking down the street, or we're buried in email in the back of an Uber, or we're not having those connections because we're on Zoom and we're on scheduled for 30 minutes and then we're falling off because all we talked about was business or the matter at hand or the agenda. So I think those sort of happenstance stranger connections where people connect and find mutual interest in each other's story and each other's background really really makes the product come to life. I mean, we say that we're not only just a tech company, we're a people company. And I think that's true because we're connecting people in the physical world. Social media platforms don't really connect you in the physical world. You just live in the digital world, and you don't ever see that person or touch that person or in the same presence as that person. And that's what I really love about the work that we do at Shipt, and what some of these delivery and transportation companies do is you're facilitating that physical human connection, which I think is just so important in our society.
I love it. I love it. Trevor, you've given me a lot to think about. I feel like it's
Oh, that's a
such
good
a,
thing.
it's a great thing. It's a great thing. And I think our listeners appreciate it as well, because we talk about a lot of common themes here that are true to humans and just being human and life itself. And we always try to connect it back to business. But yeah, I mean, the gig economy and the gig worker is a huge part of real life now. Like, this is the type of living people are making. This is the type of thing, and it's still in so many ways still just new and unsolved and
Totally.
changing, right? And so I've yet to think about, to be honest, like culture, work culture, and just that human element of this side of things. Such a large subset of people in the world that are either especially using the services, but also
Yep.
working in these services. I mean, I literally ordered food through Uber Eats last night, so I, li-
Yep.
I I've not looked at it that way, and it's very eye opening. So, um, first of all, appreciate you taking the time today to have this chat. It was super insightful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, very welcome, and thanks again. It's been a pleasure, and really love what you guys are doing, and it's really exciting to watch.
Absolutely. I hope we get a chance to catch up and hear more as she sounds like it's doing great things. So it sounds like you're at the forefront of a lot of those things. So I'd love to stay updated on, and I'll keep my eyes on the news for other great things that you guys are doing for those in that gig working space. To the listeners of the show, thank you as always. And I will never ending the never ending plug for the book Love is a Business Strategy. It's still there. I'm still proud of it. Go get it. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, tell a friend about the podcast. And if you enjoyed it, let us know. If you didn't, sure, let us know. We'll take that as well. But otherwise, we're coming out with new episodes every week. So we'll see you guys next week. And Trevor, have a good week.
Thanks, you too.
Bye.